Hi, I'm Leah Wheatholter, owner of Workman Forensics, and this is the Investigation Game Podcast.
Hey everyone, it's Alicia. Before you guys start this week's episode, I just wanted to let you all know that we did record this interview over Skype. That said, there are a couple of hiccups and bumps with the audio, but it is a great interview with wonderful content, so please bear with us, and I hope you guys enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Investigation Game Podcast. Today I am joined by Abby Ellin, a former New York Times columnist and author of Duped, Double Lives, False Identities, and the Conman I Almost Married. Thank you for joining me today, Abby.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so excited. Okay, so when I did some research for this podcast about you and so forth, I saw that you got to name a Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So before we dive into the actual book, I want to know, how did you do this and what did you name it?
That is all anybody cares about, really. I could cure cancer, and all they want to know about is the Ben & Jerry's. My ice cream flavor is Caramel Sutra, and it is on the market, and it's been on the market for like 20 years. And basically, I went up there to do a story, and I was interviewing the head flavorologist. That's what he was called. And they said, you can make any flavor you want. And I said, okay, I want to make a burger. I want to call it. And they were like, wow, that's really good. And 6 months later, they called. They said, okay, we're going to make it. So that's what happened. And I said, well, that's awesome. How much are you going to pay me? And they said, nothing.
Oh.
And I said, okay. And I said, but what about Jerry Garcia and Cherry Garcia? And they were like, yeah, sorry, no, you're not Jerry Garcia. But what they do is they give me free coupons for as long as it's on the market. So I get like free coupons for the last 20 years.
That's so great. So what did you say was in it?
The original one that I made had Kahlua in it, but this one it has this caramel core. You'll see. I mean, it's in the supermarket.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look for that on Sunday when we do our shopping. So you've also written the book, Teenage Wasteland, a former fat kid weighs in on living large, losing weight, and how parents can and can't help. And I haven't had the chance to get this book, but I am curious about its origins.
Yeah, I wrote that from eating too much Ben & Jerry's. I'm kidding. No, that's a joke. When I was a kid, I went to weight loss camp, and then I worked with them for like 6 years. So I wanted to write a book about exploring, not the obesity epidemic is what they call it. I don't necessarily like to call it that, but I wanted to explore how people lose weight and I was exploring obesity basically. Yeah. And kids and teens, and Fat Camp was a launch pad. It's like Duped. I write about these things that are my personal experience, and then I kind of use that as a launch pad to investigate the subject.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And then on the subject of Duped, I mean, what a great title. I heard Kelly Paxton, I think she actually gave away your book at a training. I was like, well, I mean, obviously I have to read it if it's called Duped and about a con man that you almost married. But, I am sad that you had to live it, but at the same time, it really is a fascinating book. And so will you provide our audience with an overview of kind of your story and what launched into this book?
Yeah. And, I'll tell you, it was a bad experience, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Actually, at least certainly my career. I met this guy. I had interviewed him for an article. He was a doctor, and I interviewed him. A year later, the story didn't run, and a year later it did. And so I, called him to fact check, and he told me he was in the Navy. He had left his wife and his private practice in California, and he was opening up a hospital for kids with cancer in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I said, well, keep me posted because that's a story. I want to know about this. And so he did, and we started talking every so often, but I mean, very professionally. There was nothing with it, We began talking more and more, and then it became kind of turned romantic. And that was sort of it. And then we started seeing each other. And within, 6 months, he had proposed.
Wow.
And by the end of the year, I had left him. Pretty much. I couldn't believe anything he said. I just couldn't trust him.
Right. What a whirlwind.
He told me that he had been a Navy SEAL and that he worked for the CIA. And he told me all this stuff that was like unverifiable. You can't call up the CIA and be like, hey, human resources, do you have this guy in your office? Right. So I had no way to verify this stuff. I mean, he told me crazy stuff. He told me he met his ex-wife when he rescued her when she was held hostage in Iran. He told me that he was held hostage in China, which is why he had screaming nightmares in the middle of the night. I mean, yeah, it just, nothing made sense. And finally, I walked out. And it wasn't until a year and a half after that I got a phone call from NCIS, which is Naval Criminal Investigative Service. And there was a doctor who was working for the government who had been writing forged prescriptions for drugs. And did I know this doctor, and did I have a prescription? That was what happened. He ended up going to jail for identity fraud.
So he was writing prescriptions under your name and other people's names, right?
Yep. People he worked with the Pentagon and like his dead parents and like, his new girlfriend. I mean, he was just, he just went from place. Yeah, he was just a bad dude. He was just a bad dude. And he said that he was an addict. And, I think he was addicted. I have no evidence, but I also suspect that he was selling. I don't know for a fact, but that's what I suspect.
You mentioned in the first chapter of your book that he had wanted to specialize in the same kind of brain cancer that your grandmother died from.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned that the two of you appeared to be on the same page about everything, like religion, career, money, family. Do you think he studied you before he reached out to you, or do you think he just made it up as he went along, or both?
No, the thing is that those things were true. He really did want to be a brain surgeon. I don't think I put it out anywhere that my grandmother, I guess I did. I heard that she had this glioblastoma, but that was in my first book, which I don't think he read. But, he just, like, I didn't show another woman when he began courting me. I didn't know that. And then he left her to come, and started seeing me. And she had no idea what happened to him. And, I didn't know things like that. I think the problem, and what made him such a liar is that, and this is what makes liars good in general, is that they mix fact and fiction, but they also, have to stick close to some fact. And that's what he did. And so that was what was so, he really was a doctor. He really was in private practice. And then he left, and he really was in the military. He really was, the medical director at Guantanamo for a little while. I mean, he really was working at the Pentagon, trying to open up this hospital for kids with cancer. Like, he didn't need to lie. He was cool.
When I was reading chapter 1, I just kept waiting on like this punchline of like, and he was none of these things, but like he really was.
He really was. That was what was so maddening about it. You didn't need to lie about this,
Right. I mean, those are all very incredible and very interesting things that he was living. In chapter 2, you write about how little attention the victims of deception and emotional fraud are given, then even blamed for ignorance. And I've worked hundreds of fraud cases and like embezzlement, and people blame my clients as well, the victims of fraud. It makes me wonder how many people are being duped. I mean, there's no way to know, but I just keep thinking that even some of those accusers are even being duped in their own lives. They just haven't discovered it yet. I mean, it seems like it's that common.
It's totally common, but who do you work with? What kind of clients?
Being a fraud examiner, like we work a bunch of embezzlements. In fact, on a podcast from a couple weeks ago, one of my clients shared his story. He talks about how people were telling him, well, you should have done this and you should have done this, but he trusted that the systems he had put in place were working. So then whenever people colluded and just started breaking that trust and lying to him and they stole over $1 million from him. It was just weird because my victims end up getting blamed for not knowing and not doing all these things.
Yep. You should have known. You should have seen it. There were red flags. Exactly. But
I do feel like it's so common that probably even the people accusing are being duped by someone. I mean, I don't think any of us are. So since we do work a lot with white collar criminals and then also like the victims of white collar crime, I found it really interesting that you interviewed and talk about in your book that you interviewed these wives of white collar criminals. Yeah. And what did you discover? I'd love for you to share with our audience what you discovered whenever you interviewed these women.
Well, one of that I thought was really interesting was the way that they were being blamed as well. And also a lot of them were thought to have colluded with their husbands who were breaking law. And these women really didn't know. They truly didn't know. Or it's that sort of thing like, I knew, but I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to see it. I thought that was really interesting. One woman I talked to, she was responsible. They had divorced, but He had stolen all this money, embezzled all this money, and she was liable for it. And she ended up having to go to court to get the law changed because she didn't have the money. And she got the law changed. Now no other woman will have to do that in Arizona. What was that these women had the double whammy of their lives falling apart, the public shame, the humiliation, and also the feds or the SEC or whoever was coming after them. So like everybody was coming after them. And they had no recourse. And that really, really struck me.
Yeah, I've definitely had cases. Well, I would say almost in every case, if there's one person stealing money. And actually, I've worked on a case where I worked on behalf of the spouse because the victim of the embezzlement was trying to collect from the spouse. So I've worked kind of both sides. And he was just kind of like, man, I was just living my life. I had my own job. We had separate bank accounts. I mean, I just knew that the company was doing well. I didn't think about the fact that my wife could have been stealing money. But then I've also had cases where that the husband and wife were working together to rip off whoever the other side was. So it's definitely never just a one size fits all type thing.
It's not. But again, it was what struck me really again is how much the women were held responsible for the men's crimes by everybody. And again, people in the eyes of the world, they want to know how the guy did it. And it's not always a man. You know, there's something called pink collar crime, which is white collar crime. But it's the man, the guy who pulled off the scheme, the Bernie Madoffs, you know, they're like, in a way, it's just like, who are they? Everybody's sort of fascinated by them. What makes them tick? How did they do this? But the women are just, you know, the spouses were just like totally victimized. And that was why I was so interested in writing the book about the victim. You know, how do you rebuild your life after this kind of betrayal? Whether being married to somebody who's a criminal or, you know, somebody who has a double life or is a pathological liar, or your colleague at work, you know, is stealing. I mean, there are all sorts of scenarios. You know, and I don't just talk about romantic fraud at all.
We'll be right back to this interview.
I'm here with Rachel Organist, who is the lead data analyst at Workman Forensics. She's been instrumental in building the data analysis tools for the Find Money and Divorce program. My first question for you today is, what is Find Money and Divorce?
Find Money and Divorce is basically our way of taking the analytical process that we've developed here at Workman through working many divorce cases and converting that process to a format that anyone can use to work through their own divorce.
Okay, so how does that work?
Essentially what the program is a series of webinars, reference materials, and spreadsheets that will help you do the same calculations we do when we're helping our clients sort out their assets. The content is organized into 5 different modules, but you can mix and match if you only want to use certain parts. So for example, you might just need help getting your documents organized, but you aren't sure you're ready to dive into your financial data. We have a module for that. Or if you'd like to use our data analysis templates, but you think you can follow the included instructions and you don't need the extra step-by-step assistance of a webinar, then that's an option too.
Okay, so basically for a user, they don't pay one fee and they have to use everything. They can kind of pick and choose what they need.
Exactly.
So my last question is, what can users expect to get from this program?
Working through the process will help users feel confident that they've identified marital assets like bank accounts or real estate that they may be entitled to in their divorce. Basically, you're making sure that you aren't out of the loop on potential marital assets or being taken advantage of due to lack of awareness if maybe you haven't been as involved in your marital finances as you'd like. The process will also help you identify what you know and what you don't know, so you can discuss any remaining questions with your attorney. And taking the time to be prepared in that way can really help you make the most efficient use of your attorney's time, and that can save you on legal costs.
Yeah, it definitely sounds a lot cheaper and a lot more useful for a lot of people.
Yeah, you'll also have a much better picture of your finances, which a lot of people find really helpful.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today, Rachel.
My pleasure.
Welcome back to the podcast. As a fraud investigator, we talk a lot about rationalization as part of the formula that increases the risk of fraud to a person or to an organization. In chapter 8 of your book, I felt like rationalization played a large part of several of those stories, especially the story about Diane and Amanda. And I wondered if you'd talk about that story with our listeners.
Well, the story with that was they were roommates. So it was not romantic at all. And this woman her roommate had cancer. And for 5 years, Diane would take Amanda to Sloan Kettering in Manhattan and help her and and basically take care of her. And it was discovered that she didn't have cancer at all. And she had created the whole thing. Was it Munchausen? Maybe. I don't know, though. I don't know if she actually made herself sick. I don't know. It's not a crime.
This was over like several years, right? 5 years maybe is what I remember.
5 years.
Yeah. And then whenever Diane confronted Amanda, she just said that she got all this attention when she was sick and just kind of kept the ruse up. I just found that fascinating. That seemed to make it okay that she was lying and that she could live with herself in doing that.
That's exactly right. People rationalize all sorts of things. It's very scary what we're capable, but it's funny because in a way, I've become much more lenient in a way about, or I don't want to say forgiving, but it is kind of a forgiving, because what I realize is that it's not that people are good or bad. It's that people are people, which means they're a mixture of both. We're complicated and we're capable of all sorts of things. I used to be and we're all hypocrites in our own ways. And I expected people to be kind of one way, and I didn't realize how nuanced everything is.
Definitely working in this field and with so many different people. And, I even worked some criminal defense cases, and just getting to know the people that are on, they're being charged with something. It's made that bright line between good and bad a lot more gray. I don't think it is that bright line. In your book, you do list some, I don't want to call them tools, but I couldn't think of any other word when I was prepping for this, that dupers or con artists, some different things that they use to help perpetuate their lies. And
oh yeah,
these are just so shocking. Can you talk to our audience about some of these?
Yeah, there's Bro App, and there's Bro App, and there's, God, what was the other one? Identities.com. That's right. Basically they have these apps where you can get somebody to write a fake resume for you and answer the phone and give you a fake recommendation for a job that you never had. You can get somebody to write you, receipts for hotels that you never went to if you were conducting an affair. You can get like the sounds of an airplane taking off. You can get the sounds of a train taking off if you want to, tell your company that you're actually, in Berlin for business when you're around the corner with your mistress. I mean, there's like a million, whatever. There's just many ways to deceive. There's many ways now. There's many ways to get caught also, but I think it's much easier to perpetuate these kind of ruses.
Sometimes whenever we look at fraud schemes, we talk about how much work they were doing to perpetuate the fraud scheme. And if they had put that much effort into their job, they probably would have advanced. Just try a little bit,
Yeah, exactly.
But this careerexcuse.com, that blew my mind as an employer, because what can you rely upon whenever you go to hire someone?
As an employer, you have to verify. And I talked to a lot of people who've been duped by employees and they say, they didn't do their due diligence. But yeah, right. What's the point where you call up somebody to verify, and then they have phone numbers, website, mailboxes, and you've done your due diligence and it's fake. So, right. What is it fair to do? Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. If I were to go really out with somebody, I think I would hire a private eye, or like one of those. They have reference companies that, ones who are hired to, they know exactly what to look for, and they could probably tell if something is fake. I think if I was an employer, I would do that. I would invest in that. But people lie on their resumes. Somebody from MIT did. It was, I don't have my book in front of me, actually, so I don't remember. But it was somebody from a big company. I don't know if it was Best Buy or one of the heads had made up where he went to school. It was just like, this stuff happens all the time.
Yeah, I had a case where there was a guy holding himself out to be a professional engineer on a large oil and gas project. And he even went to the extreme of having a stamp made with the professional engineering license number on it. It matches the professional engineering stamps in Oklahoma. And whenever you would look up the license number, to verify the engineering license, that number actually belonged to somebody that had the same last name as him. But he was working on a millions, if not billions of dollars oil and gas project, and was not a professional engineer.
How did you catch him?
He was a subcontractor on this project, and he kept going over budget. And so the main contractor started questioning him and asking him for invoices. And as they started digging, they wanted me to do a forensic audit. And so as part of that process, we asked for some documentation or something. But in a conversation with him, I said, do you know for sure that he's a licensed engineer? And that one question led to discovering that he was actually not. He can't be bonded or anything like that. I mean, because he wasn't a professional engineer. And what's actually kind of sad about that case is that it falls in a gray area where basically he can keep doing it because there was no one to stop him. There wasn't really a way to criminally charge him.
Yep.
As part of your research, you attended a Spy the Lie class, and you mentioned a lot of things in your book that they recommended as far as identifying someone who's lying. And so I'm just curious, are there any techniques that you took away from that training that you decided you were going to implement into your life when you meet people?
Yes, I took a Spy the Lie class. I took a lie detection class taught by these former CIA. It's interesting because one of the things that they tell us to look for is when somebody is saying yes with their mouth, but their head is moving no, or they're saying no, but their head is moving yes. You know, did you steal the money? And they say no, and their head nods yes. You know, so that's something I actually look for all the time with people. I also look for when people over-explain things. I think a lot of time people over-explain things, and that's their way of kind of trying to create a story. You know, and they stick really close to the facts. And most people don't do that. Most people kind of jump all over the place. So that's another tell. And you also want to look at clusters of behavior. They say that you want to look at the first, like 5 seconds that you're talking to somebody. To know if somebody's lying, you have to get a baseline of to see who they are. And you have to know who they are, so that's why it's really hard. So you have to follow people and watch people. But, so scratching your nose or looking up to the right or the left doesn't mean much. It means much only in the context of other things, with other things going on at the same time that are sort of aberrations. So you have to have a sense of who they are. But I use these, but you know what I use a lot in my life is my gut. I realize that I have a really good gut. I mean, that's why I left that guy. That's why I ended my relationship, because I couldn't verify anything, but I just suspected that something was off. So I think following your gut is a big deal. And I think we don't listen to it enough.
Yeah. And that's something you can't teach either.
That's right. You can't. But it's hard, because you think, wow, I'm following my gut, but am I being too suspicious? Am I being too cynical?
Yeah, I've gotten that.
Yeah.
I've gotten that a lot in my life because I had always wanted to be an investigator. And I told one of my friends one time, I said, have you ever noticed that our friend has a lot of emergencies and catastrophes in her life? Like at least 1 or 2 a week, And I said, there's no way that all of these are true. I think she's playing us. And my friend said, oh, you just need to stop being so cynical. You just think everybody, well, fast forward a few years, most of them were not true. So.
Oh, you were right.
Yeah, I was right. But I didn't rub it in my friend's face. But I do like where you talk about kind of grouping those behavioral characteristics to spot a liar, because like the behavioral clusters, you can't just take one behavior and say, oh, well, this person's lying. I don't know if you saw, there was a tweet going around on Twitter about somebody being fired, or they weren't being fired, but they were being suspected of fraud because they were driving a beat up car. Have you seen that post?
No.
It's pretty terrible. But when I read it, my immediate thought was, no, you don't just look at the car. You need to go look at everything. You can't accuse someone of being a risk of fraud because they decided to not spend money on a car.
And you also have to look at who they are and what again, it's the baseline norm behavior. Like, did they used to only drive Porsches and now they have a beat up car? Like, what is that about?
Right. Yeah. It's the change that I'm always looking for. It's that change in behavior. It's did something happen that resulted in a pretty significant change? In chapter 9, you talk about the behavioral tests and indicators to spotting a liar. And the whole time I was reading this chapter, I was thinking, or find some data, because that's our specialty. And then you ended up saying the same thing. So what are some of the tangible evidence and the proof that you went after when you started investigating the commander?
That is a really good question. Well, I called his ex-wife, and I found out that, not only had he never been in Iran, he didn't meet her in Iran. He picked her up when they were in middle school together while he was married to someone else. So I began there, and I was talking to her, and then she told me that he was engaged when he was engaged to me, that he proposed to her, and I found out her name and I called her. So I was doing all that kind of verifying. Then I wanted to find out if he was a Navy SEAL, and I called up the military about that, and then I found out that he's a SEAL. I couldn't verify the CIA, but it's unlikely that he worked for the CIA. Mm-hmm. So when NCIS called me, I asked the agent, and I said, did this guy have any, should I be afraid? Did he have any history of being violent or anything like that? And he said, no, not at all. There's zero evidence.
Yeah. You talking about the way that you went about finding out this information. You just picked up the phone and started calling people. Can you kind of talk about just being an investigative reporter and how you end up calling people to find out things? Because I work with a team of data analysts and accountants, and I think sometimes we forget that we can also call people and just ask them questions. And the fear on our side is that person's going to tell us you don't need to know. But in your experience, are people willing to help and to help you in your investigation whenever you're calling and asking these kinds of questions?
A lot of times they do want to talk and they want to unburden themselves. A lot of times they also don't want to, they don't want their names used or anything like that. That's okay. You don't have to. But sometimes they're so angry that they're happy to. So I find, I mean, it's worth it to call everybody. Absolutely.
Yeah. I just, reading your book, I just thought, man, we need to just call more people in our investigations. What's the worst thing that could happen? They tell us no? It would definitely be useful. You kind of touched on it at the beginning, but there's some things that you just think these are common characteristics of a quote unquote good liar.
Well, they're charming, they're creative, they're smart, they know how to spin a story. People like to be around them, so there's a lot of that. But yeah, they're very smart. They stick close to the truth. Like I said, they mix fact with fiction, but they still stick close to the truth. So instead of telling you they're from, I don't know, like Tennessee, New Jersey, they'll tell from Newark, New Jersey. You know what I mean? I mean, they'll just steer. So it's close to the truth, but not the truth. So it's easier for them to keep things straight. Right? The reason they're so smart, the really good liars can keep things in their head. They have to remember what they told to whom.
Mm-hmm. In the situation with the commander, do you have any idea how many stories he was running in his life at the same time that you were dating and engaged to him?
That's a really good question. When I was dating and engaged to him, he was courting another woman while we were together. He was also had just left the other woman before me. He was lying to his son. He was lying to who thought his father was like this war hero. He was lying to his brother. He was lying to all the people he worked with at the Pentagon. He was stealing from them, he was lying to pharmacists. He was running a lot because he would go and he would pick up drugs and he would say it was for his patients when in fact it was for him.
Yeah. Whew. That is a lot to keep up with. Abby, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. And to all of our listeners, just a reminder that Abby is the author of Duped, Double Lives, False Identities, and The Conman I Almost Married. And it's available at any bookstore or online. And Abby, if anyone has a story of maybe being duped or wanted to connect with you, how can they find out more about you?
Oh, they can go to my website. It's abbyellin.com. And I'm always looking for stories, and not just romantic betrayals at all. I want good scandals and good things to unravel and uncover, and fraud, embezzlement, Ponzi scheme, anything like that. So please send my way.
Well, thank you so much again, and it's been wonderful talking with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
The Investigation Game podcast is a production of Workman Forensics. For more information about any of the topics that we talk about on the podcast, please visit workmanforensics.com. And to register for our Be a Data Sleuth seminars, visit beadatasleuth.com. You can also connect with us on any of the social media platforms by searching Workman Forensics. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for the podcast, please feel free to email us at podcast@workmanforensics.com. Thanks for listening.